Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Gaudette, and welcome back to another installment of Top 5 Albums, the series where I walk you through my 5 favorite albums from every year. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at 1973, another amazing year for music, and it saw the continuation of a lot of the things that we saw start to pop up in the previous years with the further advancement of technology and the continued utilization of the Moog analog synthesizers, which significantly expanded the palette of sounds that different bands and artists can utilize in their writing. And it was just a very exciting time musically, with bands putting out some of the best albums of their discography, and there are countless records to come out of this year that are regarded as some of the best albums of all time. So without further ado, here are my top 5 favorite albums of 1973, starting with number 5. Okay, coming in at number 5 is 3 Plus 3 by the Isley Brothers, an absolutely amazing record to come out of 1973, and in my opinion, the best album of the Isley Brothers discography as well. It features 9 songs, with 5 of them being originals and 4 are covers, and I think this record has a really great flow to it. It's got a really nice blend of some more groovy tracks that are contrasted very nicely with these very pretty and tasteful ballads. The album opens up on a more groovy mood with That Lady, which is one of their classic hits, and about as good of a song as they could have opened this record on. And from that point on, it is just one great song after the next, with this really great blend of funk, as well as progressive and psychedelic soul. And I enjoy the covers a lot, but I think the originals are really the tracks that shine the most throughout this record. I think their songwriting was on the top of their game. For the originals, my favorite tracks are If You Were There, What It Comes Down To, That Lady, and The Highways of Life, which is a beautiful ballad with these amazing synth sounds that add this really nice layer of psychedelia to the track and just concludes the album in the best way possible. As far as the covers go, my personal favorite would have to be Summer Breeze. I think they do a really beautiful interpretation of that song and would probably be my favorite version that I've ever heard of somebody covering that track. And in general, I think the choice of covers throughout this was very nice, and they all have their own distinct traits that make them unique throughout the record. But like I said, I think the originals are really what make this record shine and are all of the main high points of this album. And like I said, I would regard this as the best record of the Isley Brothers discography, and definitely one of the best soul albums to come out of the first half of the 70s. So that is my number 5. Now on to number 4. Okay, coming in at number 4 is Call Me by Al Green, an absolute masterpiece of a record to come from this legendary soul singer. This record delivers on every front. The songwriting and the choice of covers is top-notch. The variety in moods and styles from track to track make for a very enjoyable and adventurous listen. And instrumentally, there is so much beautiful stuff going on as well between the strings and the trumpets and the saxophones, and just the general arrangements of these instruments throughout these tracks, which adds a whole nother layer of richness and depth to these already amazing tracks. The album is 9 tracks long, with most of the songs being written by Al Green and then a couple of covers here and there. And side 1 delivers 5 back-to-back incredible tracks with a great blend of different tempos and different feels. My 2 personal favorite songs from side 1 are the opening and closing track, which is the title track titled Call Me, as well as Your Love Is Like the Morning Sun, which I think is a song that really highlights how much of a difference the instruments make throughout these songs. To me, the violins are such an integral part to the mood of this song and really add to that somber sort of vibe. And I think it's the perfect track to conclude side 1 with. Side 2 then delivers 4 more amazing tracks, again with the very effective placement that we saw from side 1. My personal 2 favorite songs from side 2 would be You Ought to Be With Me and the opening track, Here I Am. Both incredible songs, and You Ought to Be With Me is probably my number 1 favorite song from this record. Again, another song with so many beautiful instrumental lines that take this really pretty song and just enhance it even more. And of all of the Al Green records that I've heard so far, for me personally, this one has by far the most standout and exceptional tracks. Like I said, it really delivers on all fronts, and for me, it's one of those records that gets better and better the more I listen to it. So that is my number 4. Now on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Overnight Sensation by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Frank Zappa is one of the most legendary musicians and songwriters of all time, and his writing style was truly unique, groundbreaking, very daring, and just sounded unlike anything else that was coming out at that time. And one of the things that always fascinated me so much about Frank Zappa is that he had this amazing ability to write this music that was really complex and out there, but also somehow managed to package it in a way that was palatable to a lot of just normal music listeners and not necessarily just musicians. A lot of the times, more progressive music that's very technical and complicated tends to resonate a lot more with musicians, but Frank Zappa has always been a unique exception to that and really crossed over to more of a mainstream audience. And I know a lot of non-musicians who love Frank Zappa, who can listen to him and hum along to all of these really complicated parts and with no musical knowledge behind it. So I've always found him particularly fascinating in that regard. And when it comes to Frank Zappa's albums, this is definitely one that would be a favorite of mine. It's got 7 tracks with this really great stylistic fusion of pop, rock, and jazz. I love all 7 tracks on here, but if I had to narrow it down to a couple of favorites, I would go with the opener, Camarillo Brillo, Montana, Zombie Wolf, and 50/50. I particularly love the instrumental sections of Zombie Wolf, specifically the very opening instrumental part. There is some really wild note choices and harmonic movements, just very technical writing going on throughout that I find very fascinating, and is just a great example of the musical genius of Frank Zappa. And I also love the vocal and marimba soli that happens in Montana. Just so many incredible musical passages all throughout this record, and I really love the energy that 50/50 has. It's placed at a perfect spot in the album, a really nice pick-me-up to set up the final 3 tracks of the record. And as is the case with any Frank Zappa record, you have no idea what to expect from one track to the next. There's going to be all sorts of twists and turns, and you can be assured that there are going to be so many interesting musical moments, and just tons of daring and groundbreaking sounds that are unlike anything else that was written at that time. So an amazing album, and in my opinion, one of the best records of Frank Zappa's discography. So that is my number 3 album of 1973. Now on to number 2. Okay, coming in at number 2 is Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, and this one is probably going to be my most cliche and predictable choice of this entire series. I don't think anybody will be shocked to see this one pop up for this year. A lot of people regard this as the number 1 album of 1973 and the number 1 album of Pink Floyd's discography, and this one is actually not my number 1 favorite of their discography, but it would make my top 3, and if you're interested in hearing me rank the entire Pink Floyd discography, I have a video of that. Be sure to check out the tier list playlist, which will be linked in the comments and the description as well. But I think this album is exceptional on every front. The songwriting is incredible, with every member of the group contributing to the highest level. The production could not be better. The wide use of keyboards, organs, and synthesizers mixed with tape loops creates these amazing layers of psychedelia that are just such a key ingredient to the Pink Floyd sound. And just the general fearless approach that they took to making this record resulted in one of the most unique and groundbreaking albums to come out of the early 70s. The album is thematic, oftentimes having songs that connect into one another, and they discuss a lot of the pressures that they faced as a band, as well as doing commentary on Syd Barrett and dealing with his mental health issues when he was a part of the band. As far as the songs go, I think every single track on here is incredible, and they all serve a very important purpose throughout the album as a whole, and it spawned a nice handful of tracks that are regarded as classic Pink Floyd songs. My personal favorite song on here would be Time. That's a track that I can listen to over and over and over again and just never get tired of it. And I absolutely love the guitar solo from David Gilmour. And my other 2 favorites would be Us and Them and Breathe. Both songs have these really mellow and psychedelic vibes that I love so much, with really tasteful guitar parts, particularly on Us and Them, and a really great use of dynamics between the verse and the chorus. So much intensity when that chorus enters, and it just hits you so hard. And while there are a handful of tracks on here that were written by Roger Waters, there is a good chunk of this record that was written in a collaborative fashion. And when it comes to Pink Floyd writing in that manner, I think this album is a perfect example of the magic that can come out of all of them putting their creative geniuses together. So obviously it goes without saying, this is a classic album, one of the best of the Pink Floyd discography, and easily one of the best albums to come out of 1973. And it was probably not a huge surprise for anyone to see this one pop up on this list, but that is my number 2. And now for the grand reveal, here is my number 1 favorite album of 1973. Okay, coming in as my number 1 favorite album of 1973 is Living Together by Burt Bacharach. This is a record that I'm willing to bet a lot of people have never heard of, and some people might be surprised to see me hold this record in such a high regard. But like I've mentioned in previous videos, Burt Bacharach is my number 1 favorite songwriter, and when it comes to his albums, this would hands down be my favorite record of his solo discography. There are so many different elements to this album that make it so enjoyable. Obviously, we have the amazing songwriting of Burt Bacharach, which encompasses so many beautiful and catchy melodies, and colorful and unorthodox chord movements that always catch my ear. But a lot of the songs on here are different from those classic Burt Bacharach pop and rock sorts of tracks, and I find a lot of the songs on here to be a little more adventurous from an instrumental perspective, with tracks that feature more prominent musical sections, as well as a couple of instrumental tracks which balance out the vocal-centered tracks very nicely. On tracks like Monterey Peninsula, Walk the Way You Talk, and Long Ago Tomorrow, which has very minimal vocals and is mostly instrumental. So I love getting to hear that side of Burt Bacharach's songwriting, and hearing the rich types of instrumentations and arrangements that he chooses for these musical sections. And they pair beautifully in addition to the vocal tracks, as well as complementing the vocal tracks very nicely. And a few of the songs on here were written for the soundtrack to the movie Lost Horizon, but I much prefer all of the versions on this record, with the tracks Living Together, Growing Together, I Might Frighten Her Away, I Come to You, Reflections, and Lost Horizon. My personal favorite tracks on here are The Balance of Nature, which I think is one of Burt's most beautiful ballads, with such pretty vocal melodies and chord movements. And I also really love the opening track Something Big, which brings the album in so beautifully. As far as the instrumental sections of these songs go, the final 40 seconds of the track Lost Horizon would by far be my favorite musical moment of this entire record. The melody is so strong, and that section just has such an intensity to it that I love so much. And like I said, getting to hear more of that side of Burt Bacharach's writing is such a treat. And combining that with the amazing vocal tracks and all of the great characteristics of Burt Bacharach's writing makes for such an enjoyable album, and like I said, my personal favorite solo album that he's put out. And the more I listen to this album, the better it gets, and after the past few listens, it really climbed its way up to my number 1 favorite album of 1973. So that is it. So to recap, my number 5 was 3+3 by the Isley Brothers. Number 4 was Call Me by Al Green. Number 3 was Overnight Sensation by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Number 2 was Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And my number 1 was Living Together by Burt Bacharach. If you haven't heard any of these albums before and you check them out, please let me know what your thoughts are, and please let me know what your top 5 albums of 1973 are in the comments. I would love to see your lists. Alright, that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for my top 5 favorite albums of 1974. I'll see you then. Take care.